Hello. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the live tasting. We're just going to wait for a few more to join. I won't lie, I've started early this week. Not opened my pouch yet, but I have had a dram already, just to wet the whistle and get things moving along. Right, 25 people, that'll do. Let's get started. First of all, welcome to all of our new subscribers and old. We've had quite a leap in subscriber numbers over the Christmas period, as is often the case, and surpassed the 3,000 number now for the first time ever. And we're hopeful that's going to keep on growing. And we have got a great tasting for you. If it is your first whiskey you've tried, and we're off to a cracking start. This is the second time we visited this distillery, and it's Glasgow Distillery. We have on the line, I'm going to pull them in now, and warning, they've got an amazing setup at the distillery. They've really pulled out all the stops for us this month, and I hope they've upped the ante permanently to see whether every guest we have on in future can produce such an incredible set for these tastings. So welcome to Emily and Elizabeth. Hello, guys.
Hi.
Look at this. We've got a whole bar set up in Glasgow at the distillery.
Yeah, our new purpose-built tasting room. It's our wee shrine. We'll be able to invite you in real life one day soon, I can tell.
Hope so, yeah. So we were just saying that this has been set up during the pandemic to sort of help with broadcasting.
So this wasn't in the books for a while yet. This wasn't meant to happen as quickly as it did. We're not really a touring facility as a distillery. We don't really have that function yet. It is part of a bigger plan, but it just hasn't been something we've kind of focused on. So this tasting room has been purpose-built for being able to come to customers virtually throughout the pandemic instead, because we obviously can't get out and meet as many people as we would have liked to in the past, almost 12 months now. Gosh. So yeah, but it's great. I'm really pleased we got it. I mean, obviously I'm not pleased about the pandemic, but I am pleased at this particular result of it, because it is smashing. We've got a big gorgeous boardroom table. So we will be able to meet and greet eventually, and it means that when we do have tour inquiries, we have somewhere small and nice we can bring people eventually. So yeah, it's great. It's really lovely.
It looks really small because you're quite far away from the camera and I'm really close. It's like I've got two fairies joining me this week. I probably need to go back a little bit.
I'll take that.
Yeah,
I'll be a whiskey fairy. I might change my job description.
Right, so do you want to kick off by telling us a little bit about the distillery? And because it's a new operation, we have featured it before, but give us a little bit of background about how it was established and what it means to Glasgow to have a new distillery.
Yeah, absolutely. So we were founded in 2014. So we are relatively new in that sense. We're the first single malt out of Glasgow for over 100 years. So I think that was really at the heart of the decision to build a distillery in the first place. We do also produce other spirits. We've got gin, we've got vodka, we've got rum, but obviously the real ammunition behind it was the whiskey itself. So we wanted to bring distilling back to Glasgow. Obviously there are other lowland distilleries and whatnot, but we wanted to really put a stamp on it and be the first to kind of drive it back and become a kind of distilling nation again. So we once were, so why not? So 2014, our three co-founders opened up. We had our first stills installed in 2015, laid down our first casks then, and ever since we've just kind of been waiting to be able to bring an actual whiskey to the crowd, and it's been the reception we've had has been fantastic. Our first release, which I think you guys have all tried previously, we did an online auction for those first 5,000 bottles of the #1 release of the original, and that sold in literally days. Like, it was such an amazing response from not just Glasgow, but the bigger kind of crowd as well. It was just overwhelming for us, being so small and kind of watching that happen, and then to be able to create all these other variations. It's been a really cool, amazing journey, and the feedback's just been so so humbling. We invited some people into the distillery when we first released the original. It was on our social channels. Again, we were very, very small, very new. We invited some people of Glasgow into the distillery to come and see the facility and try the very first jam. and it's actually their own tasting notes that are wrapped around the bottle neck of the original, which I think is really nice and really special. It kind of keeps it a part of Glasgow before we set it kind of free into the wider world. So that for me is a really nice kind of Glasgow note that we added to it.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm always intrigued with new distilleries, especially when it comes to whiskey making. Do you set out with a kind of style or target flavour profile in mind? Because there's so many variables in the whiskey making process. It's actually quite difficult to manipulate liquids to be exactly the way you want them. You've got the distillation, the fermentation, the casks, and you might be kind of fighting an uphill battle because the liquid actually wants to take a certain direction all by itself for whatever reasons. So given that there's been no distilleries or new distilleries in Glasgow for 100 years, and so there is no real precedent for style, did you kind of look to a certain sort of formula or certain characteristics that you wanted to achieve, or is it just sort of happened more naturally?
Well, I think, for us, we always had a vision in terms of what we wanted to achieve, and we knew exactly what we had to invest in. So I suppose that's also why our business model was not that we would have a visitor centre and invest lots of cash and funds in that. It was always from the get-go, it was all about invest in the very best equipment, the very best stills we could actually obtain in quite a short space of time, and also invest in fantastic operators. We have fantastically talented operators coming, graduates from Hitwater University, and enormously skilled. So investing in people also, but more importantly, investing in the oak. So we also had, I suppose, in terms of the region that we're in, we always had the kind of vision that we probably would have a triple distilled expression in our core range. But I think, as we started, we always knew, not to kind of quote that phrase, it's just a bit of a cliche, making whiskey is pretty easy, but making good whiskey is really tricky. But I think we always knew that as long as we invested in the very best equipment, very talented operators, source the very best oak, then, cross our fingers and toes. 3 years down the line, we should get something pretty amazing, and then that's exactly what happens.
Yeah, it's been really overwhelming. The quality of what we've produced so young that's the feedback I certainly get often, especially at trade shows. What used to be trade shows, people are just so surprised by like the age of the spirit and the taste and the colour, and so yeah, you can really tell that the investment was in the production and the integrity of the liquid instead of in building kind of grand distillery, as it were. We have a distillery that functions and it makes amazing liquids, and one day we'll have a distillery that functions and makes amazing liquids and welcomes the public, but we really prioritise the integrity of the liquid itself and making that as good as it can be.
Yeah. And I think also for us, it's always really important that in every expression that we do have, I know that we're going to be tasting rich and smoky, but in the other two expressions that we do have, like, you really taste the kind of the evolution of the new mixed spirit. It comes through so nicely, and the right balance of the type of casks that we have selected for these expressions. But I think, going back to your question, yes, we had the overall picture, but of course things have happened quite organically here as well, haven't they, Emily?
For sure.
Because it's a complex thing, just to start a new distillery. And in today's age, you can go back to kind of more established distilleries, and they have arguably, produced some questionable, whiskey back hundreds of years ago. So I think it's a process every distillery will have to go through, and also we're quite free in terms of, okay, we're a lowland distillery, but that doesn't mean that, we only produce triple distilled whiskey. We are not really tied down, if you like, by lots of heritage and culture, because we're young, so we can do things differently, and I think that's what's quite refreshing with us as well, because that's kind of what we have been doing from the start.
For sure.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, it's a kind of advantage that young distilleries have over older ones, is that ability to be dynamic and also responsive to customer feedback. Whereas, you take a distillery like Bowmore, 12-year-old, not that there's anything wrong with that whiskey, in fact, it's one of the best 12-year-olds available to buy. but they can't just change it tomorrow because people will get very upset. They kind of live and die on recreating that same formula over and over again, whereas you have the advantage of being able to just pivot and adapt, and that's what's exciting, I think, about the young distilleries in Scotland, well, and the rest of the world, really.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, that's exactly what we did when we come to it. That's exactly what we did with the peated, is we recognised that actually we've got an option here to tweak and make this better, and we completely reversed the process in terms of the aging process for the peated rich and smoky compared to the peated release number 1, whereas older distilleries probably wouldn't have had that flexibility to just completely change the formula and the recipe, well, not the recipe, but definitely the formula, and create something entirely different, but like equally, if not better, just as good. So yeah, it is cool to be part of a younger, more kind of like constantly changing. Like,
precisely. And also, we don't have copious amounts of casks we can kind of choose and select from, because we are a small distillery, we're a young distillery, so we have to work with what we have produced so far, and really, as Emily said, sometimes makes subtle wee changes, like as in the first peated, matured in Oloroso sherry casks and then finished in virgin. Whilst now we kind of flipped it, so matured in virgin casks, but then finished in Pedro Jimenez casks. So
okay, right.
Yes, a small kind of pivot like that.
Yeah, so I was going to get onto that. I want to talk more broadly about the 1770 range and the other expressions as well. But since you're talking about this now in casks, so the first one started off in Oloroso and finished in virgin, and then the second release, which is what we've all got now, started in virgin and finished in PX, correct?
Yeah.
So what are the rough timings on those in terms of timing cask, and what's the total age roughly? I mean, it can't be that old, obviously.
Well, we don't really like to talk about how old it is, because we don't kind of think of our whiskey in that sense. We know that it's more than 3 years in one day, which is a legal requirement. But I will say 3 years and a bit.
Yeah.
But we like to really talk about the whiskey, for what it is, for the flavours we have in it, the aromas, the quality, the complexity of it.
The rich and smoky is possibly slightly older, but it's not worth kind of humming and hawing over a couple of 6 months, 6 months to a year. Eventually one day when we're about to bottle our 30-year-old and is it 29 and a half, or is it 30, then it becomes important, but that's more for an age statement kind of launch. But this is between 3 and 5 essentially, and there's not really any pinpointing in between. It's a non-age statement, but we just don't really think an age reflects the quality. What we have can stand up to and has stood up to several kind of aged whiskies, and we're really proud of it. So
yeah, no, for sure it is a whiskey that sort of belies its age. You wouldn't know it was as young as it is. I mean, whatever it is, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, it does seem like an older or a mixture of all three. No, I was sort of more interested in the time spent in virgin versus PX, and the time spent in Oloroso versus virgin and the first release, and whether those sort of ratios have changed at all, or whether it's really a kind of grey area as to how long these liquids spend in each type of cask.
I think for us normally we tend to finish a whiskey in a cask for roughly 6 months.
Yeah, about 6 months,
give or take.
I think that'd be the same for both.
Yeah.
So it would so it would age 3 years in a day roughly, and then we would move it for about 6 months.
Yeah. Okay, got you. So the one we're about to taste has had about 6 months, give or take, in PX casks to finish.
Yeah, but honestly, to taste it, you wouldn't think it had just been there for about 6 months. You really do get that lovely raisiny sherry.
Yeah.
It is outstanding. It's definitely my favourite.
You're really tempting me to open it now. A couple more questions though. Martin, one of our viewers has put a question up. What does the year 1770 refer to?
So that is a reference to the original Glasgow Distillery, which certainly was in operation, thank you, here in Glasgow. It closed down in 1902, but they started in 1770. So it kind of made sense for us to have I suppose that kind of tie back to that kind of amazing culture and heritage we do have in Glasgow when it comes to producing single malt whiskey, like Emily was, mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
So it was a nice kind of reference back. Of course, we are not that distillery or that company, but we adopted the name.
Yeah, it's just a nod to acknowledge the first Glasgow distillery from 1770, while we kind of charge forward and bring it back in 2015. So yeah, they opened in 1770 and they closed in 1902. And between then and us, there was no new single malts in Glasgow. So obviously there were existing single malts in Glasgow, but there was no new ones open. So we just thought we'd give them the nod they deserve in our branding, by branding our first range. And then kind of charging through and bringing it back.
Yeah, nice. And then, so the range itself, before we taste this, don't worry guys, we're getting there. So we'll talk about the other expressions then, besides this peated one.
So we now have 4. We've got the original 1770, which is fresh and fruity. So that is ex-bourbon and virgin oak. And then we've got the triple distilled, which is just virgin oak. And then we've got the peated release 1. And obviously when the peated release 1 is done, it's done. Whereas the original release 1 has turned into the original fresh and fruity. That is the same liquid. The peated, we've slightly altered what we're doing with that. So when the peated release 1 is done, there won't be any more produced of that. It'll kind of evolutionize. It's becoming the rich and smoky. And we've only quite recently released, I say quite recently because I feel like we literally lost a year. Like the last time I spoke to people about triple distilled, it didn't exist. And then it existed and then we had a pandemic. So the triple distilled, we're still on release 1 of that, but when we go to bottle going forward, that will still be that, as far as I'm aware, that'll still be the same recipe and formula that we're using. So we now have, we've got 4. And I guess we're going to start doing some cask releases and stuff as well. So there's loads to play with, and it's just really exciting. Personally, the one we're about to try is my favourite. The peated release 1 was my favourite, and this is now just that. I just love that it's just got that such a nice sweet sherry finish for me. But also because we're using a heather-based peat, it's not an overwhelming smoky flavour. It's much more kind of sweet and subtle. So it is very smoky, don't get me wrong, but it's in a really nice, subtle, like much more palatable way for me than an Isle of Peat, basically.
Yeah, sure.
More kind of medicinal.
But the first release of this one, like that's your most awarded whiskey, right? It won, was it Best Lowland at the Whiskey Awards?
Yeah. It did. We won the Whiskey Awards were just phenomenal for us. So best non-age statement was what Peated's release 1 got. So it wasn't necessarily Lowland. It was just
wasn't just Lowland. There was best non-age statement, was it? That's impressive.
Best non-age statement was the Peated Rich and Smoky. We got best under 12-year-old blended malt for our Malt Riot, which is this one, which is our new blend.
Oh, yeah.
And that one, out of nowhere, we only just released this again just before the pandemic. This came into my life, and then we won an award for it. And then obviously Creme de la Creme Distillery of the Year, which none of us could have called that. That was just the best surprise ever. Annoying that we couldn't party, but we'll get there. We'll get there.
Well, maybe you'll win it again, and there won't be like social distancing restrictions, and you can party twice as hard. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, we'll make up for it, won't we?
One day. So that you win that kind of accolade twice in a row. Maybe we'll just have a party anyway.
Yeah, I think we will. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So, in other words, all this sort of chit chat has been leading up to the fact that this whiskey, in my opinion, has quite a lot to live up to, because a Distillery of the Year and best non-age statement. So let's get stuck in. Do you want to lead the tasting on it, guys? Since it's your whiskey.
Well, yeah, why not? I would say for all of our whiskey, actually, it does kind of benefit with just maybe 10-20 minutes in the glass. It really becomes a bit more vibrant, I think, with a bit of oxygen. So if you can manage to take your time with it, Go back to it after 20 minutes and just see exactly how much it has changed. But we talked about the casks already, and you can definitely, by looking at the appearance of it, you can notice that the sherry influence. So PX is also quite a different sherry, in comparison to Oloroso, which is a dry sherry. PX is a sweet sherry. They produce the sherry after the harvest of the grapes. They lay them out to dry in the sun, so they become like raisins almost. So the sherry itself is really kind of gloopy and viscous, and I think that really carries through. So you can examine the beading and the legs on this whiskey. You see that already. This is going to have a really long, lovely finish just by looking at those kind of meandering legs in that glass. So let's try on the nose. And I think that sweetness comes through really quite immediately, doesn't it? And of course, the peat there, but as Emily mentioned, we're using a heather-based peat, so you're not getting the kind of iodine you kind of notice this would get with an Islay whiskey. And of course, this is about 50 ppm, so it's it's quite high, in terms of a peated whiskey, but in combination with a kind of toffee and sweet toffee, almost
I think probably the sherry is managing to sort of temper some of that smoke a little bit on the nose, which is no easy feat to do. Like, I mean, even heavily sherried Islay whiskies that I've had, in many cases the peat really permeates through, and it's difficult to get past it. But with this, I'm getting like a kind of smoky Dr. Pepper thing going on. It's got
I get vanilla, which isn't one of the ones that, because I'm fairly new to like whiskey tastings, and I'm still kind of constantly learning and constantly training, and Elizabeth's been really, really supportive and great as a colleague for that. But see, when I guess the right smell or the right flavour when we're doing whiskey tastings, I just get such an amazing burst of pride. But I get quite a lot of vanilla from this one, which isn't actually there apparently. It's just, but everyone gets different.
And I keep telling you, there are no rights or wrong. We all have very different subjective opinions about smells and tastes. And as I said, you mentioned earlier, whiskey is such an extremely complex liquid. There are 80 different congeners, aroma combinations in a typical single vault. So it just all depends on your sensitivity towards certain things and memories as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
But this is also a lovely kind of seasonal whiskey, isn't it? I mean, it's so horrible outside. We have a storm raging, and it's pouring down, and just sitting inside with a glass of this.
It was when we had the snow fire on with this, when we were hectic, and it was amazing.
Yeah, sorry, we're talking about this.
No, you're absolutely right. It was almost like an impulsive reflex. I'm smelling this. I was like, I need to taste it now. I totally interrupted you while you were talking, but I do indeed need to taste it now. Shall we put it in our mouths?
Absolutely. All right, let's try it. So sort of kind of tobacco-y notes coming through. Bit of spiciness as well, pepperiness coming through.
It's just so smooth for me, for something so, because it is obviously 50 ppm, so it's a heavily peated whiskey, but it's so smooth.
Yeah.
There's something really, manageable isn't the right word, but there's something you get so many people that think they don't like whiskey just because they're off put by the smell or the kind of, even just the stigma that comes with it. But it's just such a sippable, lovely, smooth, smoky. Why would you not?
Exactly. I think it's also the combination. Yes. It's the combination also of our fantastic new mixed spirits. We distill in very small copper pot stills. We produce a lot of esters and lots of fruitiness coming through in our new make. And I know you mentioned vanilla, and of course we've also matured our whiskey in virgin casks. And virgin oak blends extreme, kind of vanilla flavors, and those lovely kind of vanilla oak lactones, which impacts on the whiskey itself. So all of that comes together. It's that fantastic balance of our new mixed spirit and the virgin oak, fantastic PX.
You're using full-size casks, or are you using smaller casks as well? Is it a mixture?
The Pedro Jimenez, they're hogsheads, aren't they?
They're hoggies, yeah. They're
Yeah.
quite, yeah. Hoggies and well, and also barrels. So quite small casks.
Yeah.
And then mostly standard bourbon barrel size, is it? For your Virgin Oak, is that a standard kind of 180, 200 litre kind of job?
The Virgin, yeah, and then they're going into kind of hogsheads for the.
Yeah, because I mean, a lot of the time, what new distilleries do, and this is more the case in the US actually, but they'll use smaller casks because, of course, you get some of the maturation character a little bit quicker with smaller barrels because you've got higher surface area to volume ratio, and so it can speed up some of the extractions and everything. But this is, I mean, it's impressive the amount of character you've got out of the barrel in such a short period of time. It really is. I mean, you know, they're active casks, obviously. They're new oak or they're, you know, first fill sherry, everything, and that I think probably tells us a lot about the differences between first, second, third fills, because, you know, a lot of people who are watching right now will have tried 20-year-old whiskey in second fill casks that are as pale as straw and very light on maturation character. And, you know, not to say they're not good, they can be amazing, harmonious balances of wood and oxidation and distillery character. But it is impressive to sort of see what can be achieved in a short space of time with big casks, but big active casks that are, you know, it's good wood.
Yeah, and it creates quite a big whiskey. I mean, there's a lot of things going on in this glass, you know, as we mentioned, in terms of all the wonderful kind of variables coming together, from our new mixed spirit to the virgin oak, the PX, and the fantastic peat as well, which we're using. And
we've got poetry here from Brian. Borderline. Oh, sorry, I interrupted you again. So Brian says, I'm not a big peated fan. I love sherried casks. This is a beautiful marriage of a sherry dropped kiss with subtle peat.
Oh, nice.
I like that. I might start to use that.
Just a bit.
And Aidan is also saying that he's not normally a fan of peated whiskey, but really enjoying this one.
Which is excellent, and I'm so pleased. For me, it's quite a powerful sherry flavour you're getting with it. Like, I would say a kiss of peat. Because you're only just getting a small, like, you're not getting an overwhelming peat flavour. You know it's a peated smoky whiskey, but it's not overwhelming for such a high peat count. So I would spin it. I mean, I'm going to use the term just a kiss, but it's going to be for the peat aspect for me as opposed to the actual sherry itself, because I think there is quite a huge sherry influence in coming through with this one.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very accessible whiskey, you know, for, you know, novice kind of whiskey drinkers, the more kind of seasoned drinkers like us, Emily.
I would call it a Glasgow kiss of smoke, which is probably like slang talk for some sort of awful thing that a gangster would do to you. But
a Glasgow kiss is a headbutt.
Yeah, I've never had
one, maybe don't put that in your marketing literature after all, or at least not if you're not in the UK.
A Glasgow kiss of peat.
But I'm really impressed by it. I mean, it's 55 ppm peat, which is high. You know, that's on the par with a lot of the island distilleries, and yet it's retained so much by those casks.
Yeah. So it's 50.
50, yeah. 50 ppm. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't hear the question there for a second.
He was just saying it was quite a high ppm, but it's tamed nicely by the cask itself.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
For sure.
Cool. All right, well, look, guys, it's been really interesting and informative. I'm going to go drink the rest of my punch now, because it's Moorish as well, isn't it?
Oh, definitely.
Very sippable.
And also, go back to it after 20 minutes or so, and you'll be even nicer.
Yeah, well, we'll see if it lasts 5 minutes in the glass. I don't know.
Or just have to bring back bottle, I suppose.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Well, look, thanks ever so much, Elizabeth, Emily, for joining me and entertaining us, Whiskey Fairy, and cheers to everyone that tuned in as well. We will feel free to keep leaving comments and everything, and we'll try and get back to you on any questions we didn't get to answer. and we'll see you next month.